Hey everyone, welcome back to Poplar Preparedness. I'm here with Dr. Phil Huggins, who has personally counseled over 10,000 people. In fact, he's also trained in disaster relief counseling as a chaplain and has gone on deployment with people who have suffered from all sorts of different disasters. So we're going to be talking to him about crisis disaster psychology, and you're going to get a whole lot out of this. So let me start right there by asking that question. What are some of the disasters that you have dealt with?
Well, I got to go to a bank robbery and work with the bank after they had been robbed. Convenience store robbery, worked with that. Floods, I worked with floods as far as disaster. I've had a number of small-scale personal disasters where your husband, your wife is diagnosed, has an automobile accident and dies. That's a disaster for the family. Long-term disasters like cancer or some type of a terminal illness, that is a disaster. So when you think of a disaster, my definition of a disaster is any crisis incident that erupts and destroys your everyday stream of life.
So it can be really big, affecting hundreds of thousands of people, or it can be affecting just that one person.
Or that one family, like a tornado. I personally went through a tornado.
Wow.
I stood we had plate glass windows, and I watched a tornado come right to the plate glass windows before I went to the basement. I was young.
Yeah, wow. What is one surprising thing that about people who cope with disaster?
Surprising thing about people that cope with disasters. I think the most surprising thing about that is the belief, I can't handle this. What would I do if a tornado destroyed my house? What would I do if my husband was killed in an automobile accident? The surprising thing is that people say, well, I could never handle that. It's amazing. When those events happen, you do handle it. Many, many, many people, for the most part, when those unexpected, disastrous, traumatic events happen, they manage to get through it. A day before, if you ask them, they say, I can't handle this. I could never handle that. But when it happens, they do just fine. That's, it's amazing the way the human body works.
What are some unhealthy ways that people respond to disasters that you've seen?
Well, two extremes. The one extreme is the macho man. My house was just destroyed by a tornado or by a hurricane. No problem, we'll just rebuild. Like nothing ever happened. Your entire world just got blown away. That's okay, we'll build. And that's the one extreme. Mm-hmm. The other extreme that I have seen is where you become paralyzed. You sit, as one time we came into a lady's house, and she was just sitting in the middle of her house looking at the damage. She just wasn't able to quite comprehend that. So those are the two extremes, unhealthy. One denies that there's any problem here, and the other, all they do is dwell upon the problem. Those are the two extremes.
What are some ways that we can become more resilient or be more prepared for disasters, like psychologically, emotionally?
Psychologically, one, I think, is to, even now, put in the back of your mind, I believe that as a man thinks, that impacts his emotions. So how you think, what you believe. One thing is to put into your mind that I'm going to go through a disaster. It's not a matter of if I'm gonna, it's a matter of when. So you start with that idea that I'm gonna go through a disaster. If you are listening to the weather forecast and it says, possible rainstorm, possible tornado, possible flash floods, you begin to think through in your head, what if this were to happen to me? What if a tornado comes through? What am I going to do? So you begin to prepare that in advance, so it's not that instantaneous shock, like, oh, how did this happen? Well, you've already kind of thought through. That's one thing, kind of advanced preparation in your brain, and then beginning of that develop plan. Okay, I've got a plan in my head, so when it happens, the shock to the system of what do I do now? Okay, and I as detailed as possible. If you've got kids, where do the kids go? If my house is destroyed and they don't have a bed to sleep tonight, where do they go? You call grandma and grandpa who live 2 hours away and say, oh, by the way, if my house ever has a tornado, can my kids go and stay with you? So now all of a sudden your house is destroyed. You're prepared because you've thought through this plan, and that's, it starts up here, and that's where the mindset of either sitting there traumatized or denying it is all up in the brain. It's your thought process.
Now, you counsel from a faith perspective, and you're a pastor as well, right?
Correct.
What part does faith play in disaster preparedness when it comes to psychological, emotional?
Huge. I'll give you for one example. A soldier who's going to battle. You are prepared to die. When you go into the military, they tell you that you could die. So you're out in Afghanistan, and every time you leave that base, you could die. That doesn't change the fact that as you're going out there and your Humvee gets blown up by an IUD, and you're the guy that's sitting next to you now is no longer with you, and you watched it happen, but you are totally unscathed other than a few bruises. That is grounds for a PTSD. They have found that over 50% of soldiers that have a strong faith base, before they even leave the base, 50% of soldiers who have a strong faith base do not experience PTSD compared to those that don't have a strong faith base to go from. And so that's the core. I think, you talk about how do you survive? Because if you believe in a God who is in ultimate control, that $100,000 question of why did this happen, you don't ask because you already have an answer. God is in control. This fits part of God's sovereign plan. So, okay, I don't understand this, but then I don't have to understand this because that's not my job. Without God, without that relationship, then you try to find an answer to a question where there is no answer. And that's my definition of anxiety, is looking for answers where there are none. So faith, and even more important, not just faith, but having that personal relationship with Christ, where he came to earth, he left heaven, came to earth to seek and to save that which is lost, to save sinners like you and me. That's why he came. To give us life, and not only just life, but to give us life more abundantly. Doesn't say it's going to be a life that's free of trauma, free of disasters, but it's be able to say a life that's free and more abundantly. And when as 1 John says that, these things I have written unto you that you might know that you have eternal life. John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him will not perish but have everlasting life. Okay? So when you're in the midst of this trauma, this disaster, without that personal relationship with Christ, you're focused on the disaster. But when you have that home in heaven, you go, this is but a blip on the radar screen. This is but a bump in the road, because I know what eternity lasts. And so for that believer, they're able to process through that, because it's like, well, yeah, but, when I die, heaven's my eternal home. So I don't have to worry about where this, and then secondary, the other real advantage is for people of faith. Frequently during disasters, the first place that will help you is your church. As a chaplain, the Southern Baptist Convention, we go down, we help people in the midst of disasters.
What do you think about people in the midst of a disaster starting to turn their focus to supporting or helping other people? Is that helpful for them to get through a disaster, or is it not so helpful?
I believe it gives both parties a sense of value, a sense of camaraderie. And as long as you're not denying your own need, by you coming and helping my house helps you not address your own need. You can pretend your need doesn't exist. Yeah. And so you can go help everybody else, because that means I don't have any problems. That's not a reality. And then sometimes you expect me to come back and help you, and all of a sudden I don't, and now the trauma. But it can be healthy. But that's where, because we're Americans, aren't we? Many of us, and we're independent. And that's where oftentimes the problem is I don't want your help. I need it, but I won't accept it.
Sure.
Because I think I can do it myself. And you can't. The best thing to do is, if you want to help, and especially during a disaster, is be a good listener. If you want to help somebody that went through a disaster, be a good listener. People got stories to tell. Many of the times as a chaplain, the best thing I could do was sit on the front porch with the person and listen to them tell me the stories. Sometimes it's stories about parts of their life that they're losing. Sometimes you're just telling stories that help them feel good about who they are. And that's, anybody can listen to a story,
Well, thank you so much for your time. And thank you so much for joining us. If you want to watch some more videos with Pastor Phil Huggins, over on my iMissions channel, I have several videos of him that are going to be dropping. Also, my Hurricane Ian response in Florida video has just dropped. So if you want to check those out, that's iMissions. You can find it in the description down below. If you want to check out this other video from me here on this channel, otherwise, I'll see you later. Steve Poplar out.